Hello, hope everybody's doing well today. We are going to cover chapter 14, which is about developing and maintaining relationships. While we talk about this, I want us to focus on the role that interpersonal attraction plays when it comes to developing and maintaining relationships, okay? Now, when I say interpersonal attraction, I'm not just talking about physical attractiveness, okay? I'm talking about a desire to interact with someone based on a variety of factors, including physical attractiveness, but also personality, reward, proximity, and similarities. Okay? So physical attractiveness is just one part of that. Okay? Now, personality, that's very straightforward. Reward means they can give you something that you want. Proximity means they are physically close to you, right? So it's a lot easier for you to talk to them, right? It's shown that people tend to be more attracted to people who are close to them in proximity, although FaceTime and Skype and Zoom have made that phenomenon shrink a little bit, right? And then also similarities. What do you actually have in common with the person? Okay. But let's dive into the role that physical attractiveness plays in developing and maintaining relationships, because it does seem to play a bigger role than those other factors. Okay. This is what the research on the topic shows. Shows that people tend to associate with those who are of similar physical attractiveness. Okay, now, when I'm going through this list here, I want you to keep in mind, I'm not just talking about romantic relationships. I'm talking about friendships as well. Okay? So again, people tend to associate with those who are of similar physical attractiveness. Right? This is why you see, right, a lot of attractive people hanging out together. Right? They also found that less attractive people are often afraid of rejection from more attractive people. More attractive people often believe they can do better. Again, I want you to keep in mind, we're not just talking about romantic relationships. We're talking about friendships as well. This is really saddening to me, right? That we have this mindset that we're so shallow as a society that we feel that we don't even want to be friends with someone if we're way more attractive than they are. Right? It's absolutely bizarre to me. Right? So take a look inward, because we're the ones that make up this research, right? It's the general public. Right? Take a look inward and make sure you're not one of these people. And again, I understand romantic relationships, interpersonal attraction, right? Physical attractiveness is a prerequisite to having a romantic relationship. I understand that. Right? But when we're talking about simply friendships, it's incredibly shallow. Okay? Now, these three things are particularly true in romantic relationships, meaning they're more common to be found in romantic relationships than in friendships, right? But it still exists within friendships. And then obviously there are exceptions, right? We've all seen a couple where one is way more attractive than the other. And I've seen it, and I tend to be like, I wonder how that happened. Which is a pretty shallow thought, again. And there's two reasons it may have happened. Maybe they have different ideas of what physically attractive is, right? Or maybe they're just not as shallow of a person as I am, right? And we've probably all had this thought, right? So again, take a look inward, right? Don't be that shallow of a person. Okay, let's dive into the 5 stages of romantic relationship development. Okay, we have initiating, experimenting, intensifying, integrating, and bonding. Okay. Stage 1, initiating. This is the initial meeting, right? Your first time meeting someone. Hi, I'm Gabe. Nice to meet you, right? That's the first stage. After that, generally speaking, you're done with that stage. Usually you move directly into the experimenting stage, which is when you attempt to answer the question, who is this person? Okay? Who is this person? You're going to engage in small talk and simply try to get to know that person better. Stage 3 is intensifying. This is when commitment increases a little bit. Simply put, you probably become friends or good friends at this point. Okay? Stage 4 is integrating. This is when the couple has a sense of togetherness, and other people may find it odd if they see one of you without the other often, because they've seen you together so much. You've been spending more time together, right? So if people start seeing you without each other all the time, right, they might find that odd. And then stage 5 is bonding. Bonding is a public announcement of a relationship. So I know when I was in high school, I don't know if it's still this way, being Facebook official, right? That was the thing. If you were Facebook official, right, that was as real as the relationship could get. That would be an example of bonding, right? Because it's a public announcement. I am now in a relationship with this person. So on the flip side, right, we just covered stages of romantic relationship development. Let's cover dissolution stages, or stages to actually breaking up. Okay, so we have differentiating, circumscribing, stagnating, avoiding, and termination. Okay, so differentiating. This is when differences between the couple become highlighted. You stop focusing on the similarities that you have with the other person. You start focusing on the differences. You start focusing on the negative rather than the positive. So simply put, your view on the relationship is no longer the glass is half full, the glass is half empty. Okay? Stage 2 is circumscribing. This is when information exchange is reduced and certain areas of differences are just completely avoided, generally because you've learned those areas cause fights. Okay? Stage 3 is stagnating. This is where the relationship kind of reaches a standstill. Right? Communication is often calculated at this point and well thought out. Right? You think about what you're going to say before you say it, rather than just communicating naturally. If someone were to ask, where is this relationship going? The answer would be nowhere. Nothing is happening. Comfortability becomes limited at this point around your significant other. Stage 4 is avoiding. This is where the couple actually avoids communication with each other and often physical proximity. Right? You don't hang out with the person as much. You're starting to avoid them. You're trying to stay away from them. If you live with that person, right, you might be in different rooms all the time. Okay? And then finally, stage 5 is termination, and that is the actual ending of the relationship, right? Announcing the other person, hey, this relationship is over. Okay? So those are the 5 dissolution stages, right? Stages to breaking up. Few possible causes of conflict in relationships. We're going to move very quickly through these. One is poor communication, right? And this makes total sense, right? And this is why you see in the dissolution stages, right, when you start to see communication become reduced, right? Probably some sort of conflict is going to arise through that. Okay, faulty attribution. This is where we discussed this earlier in the semester. Faulty attribution or attribution error. This is where you assume the wrong reason for why somebody acted a certain way. Okay? So I think I gave the example. If one of you showed up late to class and I just assumed, wow, you're just a bad student, you don't care about class, right? You don't care to get here on time. And in reality, you had a flat tire and you got here as quickly as you could. Right? It'd be a faulty attribution. You're starting to assume negative intentions from the other person. Okay. Then finally, conflicting preferences or personality traits. That's very, very straightforward and self-explanatory. Okay, so let's talk about conflict. Right? We as humans, we hate conflict. We all often see it as destructive, and it often is destructive if it's not handled properly and correctly. So when is conflict actually destructive? It's destructive when it ends with a winner and a loser. Right? When I win and you lose, or you win and I lose. This actually harms the relationship, okay? Making the conflict destructive. Okay? When individuals act too aggressively, right? So when things become hostile and emotion-filled, you're no longer necessarily just discussing the problem, but there's so much emotion attached to what is coming out, right? That actually can, leading down in the 4th point there, it can actually harm the other person's self-esteem. Okay? When individuals do not actually express how they feel. And again, these 3 are all kind of tied into each other. Right? Because suddenly, I'm not even expressing how I feel. I'm not telling you how I feel. I'm just showing you through a burst of emotion. Right? So all those things can make conflict destructive. But again, we always tend to think of conflict as being something that's so negative. But it can also be a very positive thing when it's handled correctly. Okay? So when is conflict actually beneficial? beneficial when it brings out problems that get solved. Right? If I have a problem with somebody and I just sit on it, I don't address the problem. Right? I have a problem with my significant other. What do you think is going to happen long term? Resentment is probably going to build because I haven't addressed that problem. I've just internalized it. Right? So when conflict can actually bring out those problems that get solved, right, that can be a very beneficial thing and remove that potential resentment down the road. When it brings people closer together, right, this can happen when people make up, right, they can actually feel closer to each other, especially when problems get brought up that have been solved. When it helps people understand each other better, right, and when it strengthens the relationship, right. This is when conflict can be very, very beneficial, right, particularly in relationships. Again, it needs to be handled correctly, which we're going to talk a little bit about coming up here, okay? So conflict management techniques. 5 conflict management techniques we're going to discuss: withdrawing, accommodating, forcing, negotiating, and collaborating. Okay, those are the 5 conflict management techniques. I'm going to use a pretty corny example that I've used in the past. It seems to help students remember these conflict management techniques better. I promise you this is not a real example, but I've had students who are like, no, it's way too real of an example. This definitely happened. But I promise you this is a made-up example. This wasn't an actual conflict that I went through with my girlfriend. So the conflict management the example I'm going to give is, let's say me and my girlfriend are having a disagreement. I like to sleep with the room pitch black. She likes to sleep with the nightlight on. Okay, so there's our conflict. Okay, so withdrawing is the first conflict management technique. Okay, withdrawing is where you literally remove yourself from the conflict. Right, leave the proximity. Right, take yourself away from the conflict. So an example of withdrawing in this hypothetical conflict scenario that I've given would be, okay, you know what? I'm actually going to go sleep in another room. Right? I'm going to remove myself from the conflict and get away from it. Okay? Accommodating is where you put the other person's needs before your own. So accommodating in this situation would look like this. Hey, I like to sleep with the room pitch black, but I care about you, and your feelings are more important than mine. Therefore, we can sleep with the nightlight on. I will get used to it. Okay, that would be accommodating. Forcing. This is actually the opposite of accommodation. This is where you put your own needs before the other person's. So an example in that scenario would be me saying, I don't care if you like to sleep with the nightlight on. We're not sleeping with it on. We're going to sleep in a dark room, period, end of story. Right? Putting my own needs before the other person's. Okay? Negotiating. Okay? This is when neither party gets entirely what they want, okay? But they get part of what they want. Right? And people often think that negotiation or compromise is the ideal way to address conflict management. It's actually not. It's actually collaboration. Now, collaboration isn't always possible, right? But when it is possible, it's absolutely the ideal way to handle conflict. Okay? So negotiation. Again, we both get part of what we want, but we don't get all of what we want. Right? Part of what we want, part of what we don't want. So negotiation in this scenario would look like this. Why don't we sleep with the nightlight on every other night? Right? So that way, one night I get what I want, the next night you get what you want, and so on and so forth. Right? So a lot of times, negotiating or compromise can be viewed as meeting somewhere in the middle. Note, it doesn't just have to be 50-50, right, to necessarily be negotiation or compromise, right? It doesn't just have to be every other night, right? We could negotiate and say, well, we'll sleep with the nightlight on 2 nights to every 1 night it's off, or vice versa, right? The only thing that actually makes it negotiation or compromise is neither of you get exactly what you want. You've at least given a little bit, right? It could even be, well, we're going to sleep without the nightlight on 6 nights in a row, and then 1 night you can have it on, right? That would still be negotiation or compromise. Now, it would be a rather one-sided negotiation or compromise, but it's still negotiation. Okay. Collaboration is where you find a solution that actually satisfies both parties' desires or wants, right? So tough to come up with an example, right, for this scenario. Maybe a rather corny example might be, okay, I know you like the nightlight on, I like it off. Why don't we hang a blanket in the middle of the room? That way I get my side of the room completely dark so I can sleep, right? You get your side of the room lit up by the nightlight. That way you can sleep, right? We both get what we want and we move forward. Okay. Another example might be, hey, you know what? Why don't you sleep with the nightlight on? I have an eye mask that I actually think is really comfortable. I'm going to wear that. Right? That way we both get what we want. Again, pitch black room to me, light room to her. Right? So those are the 5 conflict management techniques. Okay. A few relational repair strategies that the book talks about. We're going to move pretty quickly through these. So one is engage in open and honest communication. Again, this means if you have a conflict, right, or you have a potential conflict, something that's been bothering you, right, it's better to be open and honest and address it rather than internalize it, let it build up, right, and let that resentment start to build. Okay. Exhibit willingness to listen to understand, not listen to respond. We've talked about how important this is earlier in the class, right, and how our country does this, especially in politics. The right and left don't want to listen to each other. Right? They just want to listen to respond and tell the other side why they're wrong, and neither one is understanding each other. Okay. Be willing to interpret the other's behavior as well-intentioned. This goes back to faulty attribution. Right? Assume their intentions were good. There was a reason they acted the way they did. And in conflicts, we tend to immediately assume the other person's intentions were negative and they're just evil. Right? And again, this is rampant in politics, right? The left assumes that the right's intentions are evil, and the right assumes the left's intentions are evil, and neither of those are true, right? Both sides probably have really, really good intentions, right? They just have a different way of actually going about, right, what they think would be a positive society. Okay? Reduce negativity, right? Stay positive, right? That's kind of common sense. And then finally, if all this fails, right, you can seek out support from a third party. Whoops. Okay, last slide. So traits of effective relational communicators. Right? What does that mean? That means you're good at communicating with people you have relationships with. Right? Not just romantic relationships, but also friendships, right? Or family or acquaintances. Right? People who are good, effective relational communicators have the ability to address issues clearly and avoid ambiguity, meaning they're very specific. Here's exactly what's bothering me. Right? They're going to address the issues very clearly and engage in open and honest communication. Okay? They have the ability to adapt their communication to the situation. Right? This is a concept called rhetorical sensitivity, which we're actually going to talk about in chapter 13. So the ability to adapt their communication to the situation. Right? You shouldn't actually communicate the same way with everybody. Right? You should communicate differently, whether you're communicating with your mom or your dad or your significant other or a friend of yours or a different family member. Right? You should adapt your communication to the situation. Good, effective relational communicators have the ability to understand their own and the other person's values and beliefs. At the end of the day, a lot of times that's where disagreements come down to. People have different values and beliefs, and if we take it back into politics, the right and the left have entirely different values and beliefs. But we, instead of talking about those different values and beliefs, we actually argue over the behavior that is caused, right? That is being caused by those values and beliefs. But if we could actually address those, right, we might be able to negotiate a little bit. And then finally, this is a really big one. This is a really big one. I hope this is the biggest thing you take out of this chapter. Good, effective relational communicators have the ability to make the other person feel as though a disagreement does not make you think less of them. This is huge. And this is it's disappearing in our country. I mean, how many posts have you seen that say, if you voted this way, unfriend me? If you think this, unfriend me. What are you communicating to those other people that disagree with you? First off, you're creating echo chambers, which we've already talked about why those are dangerous, right? And can be very, very harmful, right? But also you're saying, you're such a terrible person, I don't even want to associate with you. A disagreement should not make you think less of someone else. But we've become convinced in this country that if somebody voted differently than us, they're terrible people. And we should look down at them. When in reality, they just had different values and beliefs. And that's absolutely sickening to me. And again, if you voted for this person, I fucking hate you, right? I've heard people say that. And that's unbelievable. Good, effective relational communicators have the ability to make the other person feel as though a disagreement does not make you think less of them. Okay? I really hope that point gets nailed home. We've got to stop doing this to each other. We've got to stop demonizing people who disagree with us. Okay? That's it for chapter 14.